The marble city of Aurelian rose from the desert like a prayer carved in stone. Its white columns caught the morning sun and threw it back toward the heavens, as if the city itself were in constant conversation with the gods. Temples crowned every hill, their golden domes visible for miles across the sand, and the air perpetually smelled of incense and offering fires. This was a city built on faith, where the divine and mortal worlds overlapped so completely that citizens claimed to hear the gods whispering in the fountains. Lysandra had lived her entire life in Aurelian's shadow, in the modest quarter where craftsmen and merchants raised their families. She was the daughter of a potter, a man whose hands shaped clay into vessels that held water, wine, and offerings to the gods. Her mother had died bringing her into the world, leaving behind only a daughter marked by the difficult birth. 3 scars ran along Lysandra's left cheek, pale lines that caught the light like rivers on a map. The midwife had said they were the gods' fingers, marking her for something special. For 18 years, Lysandra had wondered what that something might be. The answer came on the morning of the choosing ceremony. Every year, on the summer solstice, the high priests gathered in the great temple to select maidens who would serve as temple brides. Young women offered to wealthy patrons seeking divine favor. It was considered the highest honor a common girl could receive. Temple brides lived in luxury, wore silk instead of wool, and spent their days in prayer and ceremony rather than labor. Their families received generous compensation, and the girls themselves gained status that elevated them above their birth. But the true purpose was darker than the gilded surface suggested. Temple brides were not wives, but offerings, living symbols of devotion that powerful men could display to prove their piety. Some patrons treated their temple brides with respect, providing comfortable lives in exchange for their ceremonial presence. Others treated them as property, beautiful objects to be shown off and discarded when their novelty faded. Lysandra had never expected to be chosen. Girls selected as temple brides were typically flawless, unmarked, unblemished, perfect representations of divine beauty. Her scars should have disqualified her immediately, yet when the high priest read the names that morning, hers was among them. Lysandra, daughter of Marcus the potter, marked by the gods, and chosen for sacred service. The words echoed through the great temple, bouncing off marble walls and settling over the assembled crowd like a pronouncement of fate. Lysandra's father, standing beside her, went pale. Around them, other families erupted in celebration or disappointment, depending on whether their daughters had been called. "This is a mistake," Marcus whispered. "They can't mean you. Your face, the gods' mark," Lysandra said quietly, touching the scars that had defined her entire life. Perhaps the midwife was right. Perhaps this is what they marked me for. The ceremony proceeded with ancient ritual. The chosen girls were brought forward, dressed in white ceremonial robes, and presented to the patrons who had petitioned for temple brides. These were wealthy men, merchants who'd made fortunes in trade, landowners whose estates stretched beyond the horizon, military officials who'd earned favor through conquest. Each had paid a substantial sum to the temple for the honor of receiving a temple bride. One by one, the girls were matched with their patrons. Lysandra watched as each pairing was blessed by the high priest, as each girl was led away by the man who would determine her future. Some looked terrified. Others maintained expressions of serene acceptance. A few even seemed excited by the prospect of elevated status. Finally, only Lysandra remained. The high priest consulted his scrolls, his ancient face creasing with confusion. "The maiden Lysandra has been chosen by Tribune Gaius Marcellus, commander of the 3rd Legion's auxiliary forces, veteran of the northern campaigns, favored by the emperor himself." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Tribune Marcellus was legendary, a military hero whose tactical brilliance had secured Rome's northern borders. He was also famously particular about appearances, demanding perfection in everything from his soldier's armor to his household decorations. The tribune stepped forward from the shadowed colonnade where patrons had been waiting. He was perhaps 40 years old, powerfully built, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had witnessed too much combat. His armor was polished to mirror brightness, every piece of equipment positioned with military precision. He moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. When he saw Lysandra, he stopped. His eyes traveled over her white ceremonial robe, taking in her dark hair, her slender frame, the way she held herself with quiet dignity despite her obvious nervousness. Then his gaze reached her face. His expression transformed from neutral assessment to visible disgust. "This?" His voice carried throughout the temple, designed to project across battlefields, now projecting his contempt. This scarred creature is what the temple offers me. The high priest stepped forward quickly. Tribune, the maiden was chosen according to sacred. I don't care about your sacred rituals. I petitioned for a temple bride to display at the emperor's upcoming feast. I need beauty, perfection, a symbol of divine favor that reflects well on my household. He gestured dismissively at Lysandra. This girl looks like she lost a fight with a wild cat. How am I supposed to present her to the imperial court? Lysandra felt the words like physical blows. Around her the crowd had gone silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on her scarred face. She wanted to run, to disappear, to be anywhere but standing in front of this man who looked at her with such open revulsion. Tribune, the high priest said carefully, the gods themselves marked this maiden. To reject her is to reject their will. Then the gods have poor taste. Marcellus turned his back on Lysandra, addressing the crowd instead. Let it be known that Tribune Gaius Marcellus does not accept substandard offerings, not in military service and not in sacred ceremony. I will petition the emperor himself to have my payment returned and my name removed from this year's selection. Tribune, please. Lysandra found her voice, though it came out small and broken. I will serve faithfully. I will do everything required. You will do nothing for me. Marcellus finally looked at her directly, and the cold dismissal in his eyes was worse than his anger. You are rejected. Gather whatever dignity you have left and return to whatever hovel spawned you. I will not have my reputation tarnished by association with damaged goods. He strode from the temple, his footsteps echoing off marble, leaving silence in his wake. The high priest looked stricken. This is unprecedented. A patron has never rejected. Then let it be recorded, another priest said quietly. The maiden Lysandra, rejected by her chosen patron, is released from temple service. He spoke the formal words, but they sounded like a curse. May the gods guide her path as the mortal world has turned away. Lysandra stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Around her the crowd began to disperse, some shooting her pitying glances, others looking relieved that the embarrassing scene had ended. Her father pushed through the crowd, reaching for her, but she couldn't bear his touch, couldn't bear the humiliation of being comforted after such public rejection. She ran, through the great temple's doors, down the marble steps, into the streets of Aurelian, where citizens parted before her like water before a stone. She ran until her legs burned, until the white ceremonial robe was stained with dust, until she reached the massive gates that marked the city's eastern boundary. Beyond the gates lay the desert, endless sand and stone, the domain of bandits and beasts and whatever gods inhabited the empty places of the world. Lysandra had never been outside Aurelian's walls. She'd been taught that the desert was dangerous, that only fools and exiles ventured into that wasteland. But the city held nothing for her now except shame. Rain began to fall, rare in the desert, a gift from temperamental gods. But this rain felt like judgment, cold and relentless. Lysandra stumbled beyond the gates, her white robe now gray with mud, her hair plastered to her face. She had no plan, no destination, only the overwhelming need to be away from the place where she'd been so thoroughly rejected. She walked until her strength gave out, until her legs simply stopped obeying. She collapsed against a large stone formation just as darkness fell, the rain still pouring down, washing away the last remnants of who she'd thought she might become. A temple bride, chosen by the gods, marked for something special. All lies, all beautiful, devastating lies. She closed her eyes as the rain continued, accepting that she would likely die here, alone in the desert, rejected by man and God alike. Perhaps that had always been her destiny. Perhaps the scars weren't a mark of favor but a warning. Stay away, damaged goods not fit for sacred service or anything else. In the distance, thunder rolled across the desert sky, and through the sound of rain and thunder, Lysandra heard footsteps approaching. She looked up through the downpour and saw a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, moving toward her with purpose. Lightning flashed, illuminating armor blackened by fire, a face marked by battle and something darker, haunted eyes that saw her collapsed form and didn't turn away. The figure knelt beside her, and she felt strong arms lifting her from the mud. "I've got you," a man's voice said, rough from disuse but surprisingly gentle. "Stay conscious if you can. My shelter isn't far." Lysandra tried to speak, to ask who he was, to understand why anyone would help her. But exhaustion and shock overwhelmed her, and darkness claimed her vision. The last thing she felt was the steady rhythm of footsteps carrying her away from the city that had rejected her, toward whatever fate awaited in the desert beyond. Consciousness returned slowly, accompanied by the smell of wood smoke and something medicinal. Lysandra's eyes opened to rough stone walls, a low ceiling supported by ancient timber beams, and firelight dancing across surfaces carved directly from desert rock. She lay on a simple cot covered with surprisingly clean wool blankets, her body aching but warm. The white ceremonial robe was gone, replaced by a plain linen tunic that wasn't hers. Someone had cleaned the mud from her skin and bandaged a cut on her arm she didn't remember receiving. Memory flooded back. The rejection, the rain, the collapse beyond the city gates, and the figure who'd found her. She sat up carefully, head spinning. The dwelling was more cave than house, carved from red stone. But someone had made it livable. Shelves holding supplies, a table with a single chair, weapons hanging on wall pegs with military precision. In one corner stood armor on a wooden stand, blackened as if it had survived fire. "You're awake." Lysandra turned toward the voice. A man stood in the entrance, silhouetted against late afternoon sunlight. He was tall, powerfully built, with the bearing of someone trained for combat. As he stepped into the firelight, she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair worn longer than military regulation allowed and several days' worth of beard. His face bore violence's marks, a scar through his left eyebrow, another along his cheekbone, the weathered look of years campaigning. But his eyes caught her attention, dark and haunted, carrying the weight of unspoken things. He wore a simple tunic and leather breeches. His movements were careful, controlled, as if he constantly monitored his own body. "How long was I unconscious?" Lysandra asked hoarsely. "A day and a night. You had fever from the rain and exposure. I gave you medicine. Temple herbs, ironically enough." He moved to the fire, ladling something into a wooden bowl. "You should eat. Your body needs strength." He brought her the bowl, a simple stew that smelled better than anything from her father's table. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and she felt calluses from years holding weapons. "Who are you?" she asked. "Kale." He stepped back quickly, putting distance between them. "I was a Centurion once, first cohort, Imperial Guard. Now I'm just a man who lives beyond the walls. You saved my life. I found you dying. Bringing you here was practical, not heroic." His tone was deliberately flat. "You're from the city. What were you doing outside the gates during a storm?" The question brought everything back. Tribune Marcellus's rejection, the public humiliation, her desperate flight. Lysandra's hand instinctively touched her scarred cheek. "I was chosen as a temple bride. My patron rejected me. He said I was damaged goods, not fit to represent his household." The words came out bitter. "So I ran. I didn't care where, just away from the shame." Kale's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his haunted eyes. "Temple brides. The gods' brothels dressed in holy ceremony. You're better off rejected. Easy for you to say. You weren't publicly humiliated before the entire city." "No, my humiliation was more private." He moved to the entrance, staring out at the desert, but equally permanent. Lysandra studied him more carefully. He'd said he was Imperial Guard, the Emperor's elite soldiers, chosen from the best warriors. They were legends, men who stood at the center of power. Yet Kale lived in a cave in the desert, alone, with the bearing of an exile. "What happened to you?" she asked quietly. "Something worse than rejection." He turned back to face her. "You should eat, rest, and leave at dawn. This isn't a place for you." "Why not?" "I said you should leave. I didn't say I was alone." The cryptic answer sent a chill through her. "Is someone else here?" "Something else." Kale moved back into the dwelling, and she noticed how carefully he positioned himself, never quite relaxed, always monitoring something internal. "I'll take you back to the city gates tomorrow. You cannot stay here. I have nothing to return to. My father will be ashamed. The city will remember my rejection forever." Lysandra set down the bowl, anger rising. "You saved my life. The least you can do is tell me why you're desperate to send me away." Kyle was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower, more controlled. "Because the full moon rises in 3 nights, and when it does, you need to be far from here." "Why? What happens during the full moon?" Instead of answering, Kale moved to where his armor stood. He lifted one shoulder piece, revealing his bare left shoulder beneath. Lysandra gasped. A brand marked his skin, not a simple military tattoo, but an elaborate symbol seared deep into flesh. It depicted a beast's head surrounded by broken chains, rendered in black that seemed to absorb light. The mark radiated wrongness, a visible corruption that made her skin crawl. "The Beast Legion," Cale said quietly. "During the northern campaigns, my cohort discovered something in the mountains, an ancient temple to gods older than Rome. Inside were prisoners, men and beasts bound by dark magic. My commander ordered us to execute them all and burn the temple." He lowered the armor, covering the mark. I refused. I couldn't kill bound prisoners, so my commander branded me with this mark and left me in the temple as it burned. He told the emperor I'd died heroically. "But you survived." I survived, but something survived with me. Kyle's hands clenched into fists. The magic in that temple was a curse that turned men into monsters. The prisoners were warriors punished for rebellion by having beasts bound to their souls. When the temple burned, one of those beasts transferred to me. Lysandra tried to process his words. Curses, beasts, dark magic. These were things from old stories. But the mark on Cale's shoulder was real. What kind of beast? I don't know its name. But 3 nights each month when the moon is full, it takes control. I become something neither man nor monster, trapped between forms, driven by rage I can barely contain. He moved back to the entrance. I've built this shelter far from the city. I chained myself during the transformation. It's the only way to keep the beast from killing. The words hung in the firelit air. Lysandra looked at this man, this fallen Centurion carrying a curse because he'd refused to commit murder, and saw not a monster but someone fighting desperately to remain human. "How long have you lived like this?" 5 years. Ever since the temple burned. Cale's voice was hollow. "I've learned to manage it, learned the signs when the beast surfaces. But the full moon is different. During those 3 nights, the curse is absolute. And you've been alone all this time? By choice and necessity. The beast doesn't distinguish friend from enemy. Anyone near me during transformation is in danger." He finally looked at her directly. "Now you understand why you have to leave. I won't risk your life." But Lysandra found herself shaking her head. "You saved me when you didn't have to. You could have left me in the rain. That was before I knew you'd be stubborn. I have nowhere else to go, Cale. The city rejected me. I have no skills, no prospects, nothing waiting except pity and shame." She stood, testing her legs. "But here, with you, I see someone who chose honor over obedience. Someone who carries a terrible burden, but hasn't surrendered his humanity. It's not the same, isn't it? We're both marked by things beyond our control. We both carry scars that make us unacceptable." She touched her face. "At least your mark has a purpose. Mine just makes me ugly." "You're not ugly." The words came out quickly, surprising them both. Kyle looked away. "The scars don't define you, but that doesn't change the danger. 2 nights from now, you need to be gone." "Or what? You'll let me make my own choice?" Cale's jaw tightened. "You don't understand what you're choosing. Then show me. Let me help you prepare. If I'm truly in danger, I'll leave. But let me make an informed decision instead of being sent away like damaged goods." The words hit their mark. Cale flinched, perhaps hearing the echo of what Tribune Marcellus had called her. "One day," he finally said. "You can stay 1 more day. Help me prepare the chains, the reinforcements. See what this actually means. Then, if you still want to leave, I'll guide you back myself. And if I don't want to leave, then you're more foolish than I thought." But there was something in his voice, not quite hope, but perhaps a whisper of relief at not being completely alone. That night, as Lysandra lay on the cot and listened to Cale moving restlessly in the darkness, she wondered what gods or fate had brought her here. A failed temple bride, and a cursed Centurion, both cast out by the world they'd served. Perhaps rejection was its own kind of destiny. And perhaps, in the shadow of that curse and these stone walls, she'd finally found somewhere she belonged. Morning came with harsh desert sunlight streaming through the cave's entrance. Lysandra woke to find Cale already awake, standing at a crude workbench examining chains, thick iron links that looked strong enough to bind a wild bull. "You slept well," he said without turning. "No nightmares?" "Only the usual ones." Lysandra sat up, pushing tangled hair from her face. "Reliving my rejection. Those don't go away just because you sleep somewhere different." Kyle glanced over his shoulder, something like understanding in his eyes. "No, they don't." He returned his attention to the chains, testing each link methodically, searching for weaknesses. Lysandra noticed his hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but as if they wanted to do something other than what he commanded. "Are those for the transformation?" she asked. "Yes. I anchor them to iron rings embedded in the stone." He gestured toward the cave's deepest corner, where 4 heavy rings protruded from rock floor and walls. During the full moon, I lock myself in place. The chains are the only thing standing between the beast and whoever might wander close. Lysandra stood and moved closer, examining the elaborate system. The chains connected to iron cuffs designed to lock around wrists and ankles. Additional restraints crossed the chest and waist. It was less a binding system and more a complete prison. You do this alone, every month? I have to. There's no one else. Cale set down the chain he'd been inspecting. The transformation begins at moonrise on the first night. By the time it's complete, I'm not capable of rational thought. The beast operates on instinct, hunger, rage, the desire to hunt. The chains keep it contained. What does it feel like? The transformation? Cale was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was distant. At first, just heat. My blood feels like it's boiling. Then the pain starts. Bones shifting, muscles tearing and reforming. The beast doesn't fit in a human body, so the body has to change. He touched his chest. But the worst part isn't physical pain. It's feeling yourself disappear. Your thoughts scatter. Your memories fade. Everything that makes you human gets pushed aside, and something else takes control. Something that knows only violence. And when the moon sets, I wake up human again. Exhausted, sometimes injured from fighting the restraints. Covered in blood, usually my own. He met her eyes. But human. For another month at least. Lysandra tried to imagine living with that cycle, knowing that 3 days each month, you would lose yourself completely, become something monstrous. The isolation alone would drive most people mad. How do you bear it? Because the alternative is death, mine or someone else's. Cale returned to testing the chains. The first few months I thought about ending it. But then I realized, the beast didn't ask to be bound to me. We're both prisoners of a curse we didn't choose. Killing myself would be killing it too. You feel sympathy for the creature that took your humanity. I feel responsibility. He set down the chains and faced her. The beast isn't evil, Lysandra. It's just what it is. A creature of rage and instinct. It didn't choose to be bound to a human soul. If there's evil here, it's in the curse itself, not in either of us. The words revealed more about Cale than anything else. Despite 5 years of isolation and monthly torment, he'd maintained his capacity for compassion, even for the thing that had stolen his life. That's why you refused to kill the prisoners in the temple, Lysandra said quietly. You saw them as victims, not monsters. I saw them as warriors who'd been punished by having their humanity taken away. My commander wanted to execute them for being cursed, which made as much sense as executing someone for being struck by lightning. Cale picked up one of the wrist cuffs. So I refused, and I got cursed myself. Perhaps the gods have a sense of irony, or perhaps they saw something in you worth preserving, even cursed. Cale's laugh was bitter. The gods don't preserve. They punish. They test. If they saw anything in me, it was an opportunity for amusement. He moved toward the entrance, staring out at the endless desert. The morning sun painted the sand in shades of gold and copper, beautiful and merciless. You should start preparing to leave, he said. I'll give you supplies, food, water, a weapon. The city gates are half a day's walk. If you leave now, you'll reach them before dark. I told you I'm not leaving, and I told you that you don't understand what you're choosing. Cale's voice hardened with frustration. This isn't romantic, Lysandra. The best outcome is that you leave now and eventually forget this place exists. The worst outcome is that I lose control before the full moon, or the chains fail, and the beast tears you apart. Then teach me how to help. Lysandra moved beside him. Show me how to secure the chains, what signs to watch for if the transformation starts early. If I'm going to be stubborn, at least let me be useful. Cale turned to look at her, conflict visible in his eyes. The desperate desire not to be alone, warring with the terror of being responsible for someone else's death. Why? He asked. Why risk this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. I've spent 18 years being invisible, being the potter's daughter with the marked face. The one time I was chosen for something special, I was rejected for being damaged. Now I'm here, with someone who actually sees me as something other than scars. You think I'm going to walk away from that? I see the scars, Lysandra. I just don't care about them. Exactly. She touched his arm, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles. You don't care about the marks that define me in everyone else's eyes. That's worth staying for. Cale closed his eyes, struggling with the decision. When he opened them again, there was resignation mixed with something that might have been hope. 2 days, he said. You can stay for 2 days. Help me prepare the restraints, learn the warning signs. But when moonrise approaches on the third night, you leave. No arguments. Agreed. And if something goes wrong, if the beast starts to surface early, you run. You don't try to help. You just run as fast as you can. I understand. I don't think you do. Cale's expression was bleak. But you will, soon enough. He moved back into the cave, and Lysandra followed. For the next several hours, he taught her his careful rituals, how to test each chain link, how to secure the cuffs so they wouldn't slip, how to check the anchor points. He showed her supplies he kept stored, clean bandages for afterward, water, a knife within reach in case the chains failed. You've thought of everything, Lysandra said. I've had 5 years to refine the system. Kyle locked one of the cuffs around his own wrist, demonstrating. The first few transformations were chaos. I nearly escaped twice. But eventually you learn. You adapt. You find ways to survive. As the day wore on, Lysandra began to understand the true isolation of Cale's existence. This wasn't just about physical restraints. It was about living every day knowing that part of yourself was a danger to everyone around you. It was about choosing exile over connection, loneliness over the risk of causing harm. That night, as they sat by the fire eating a simple meal, Lysandra noticed Cale's hands trembling more noticeably. It's starting, isn't it? She asked. The beast is getting closer to the surface. Cale nodded slowly. The full moon is tomorrow night. The transformation begins at moonrise, but the beast always knows it's coming. It gets restless, pushes against the boundaries. I can feel it moving beneath my skin like something trying to break free. He looked at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. By this time tomorrow, I won't be myself anymore. I'll be the thing the curse made me, and you'll understand why you can never stay. But Lysandra, watching the firelight play across his haunted face, found herself thinking the opposite. She'd spent her life being told she was marked, damaged, not enough. Here was someone else marked by forces beyond his control, someone who'd turned his curse into a reason to be more careful, more compassionate, more human. If that wasn't worth staying for, nothing was, even if it meant facing the beast when the moon rose full. The second day passed with agonizing slowness. Cale grew increasingly withdrawn, his movements becoming more erratic as sunset approached. Lysandra watched him pace the cave like a caged animal, his eyes occasionally flashing with something that wasn't quite human. You need to leave now, he said for the third time that hour, before it's too late. We agreed I'd stay until moonrise tomorrow night. I'm changing the agreement. Kyle's voice was strained, his jaw clenched tight. The beast is closer to the surface than it should be. I can feel it clawing at my mind, trying to take control early. You need to go. Lysandra was about to argue when she heard something that made her blood freeze. The sound of horses approaching across the desert sand. Kyle heard it too. In an instant, his demeanor changed from agitated to dangerously alert. Get back into the cave. Now. Who would be coming here? No one who means well. He moved to where his weapons hung on the wall, taking down a gladius, a short sword standard to Roman soldiers. This location is supposed to be forgotten. If someone's coming here, they're looking for me specifically. Lysandra retreated deeper into the cave as Cale positioned himself in the entrance, weapon ready. The sound of horses grew louder until finally, 6 mounted soldiers in imperial armor appeared, their red cloaks marking them as military scouts. The lead rider dismounted, a lean man with a Centurion's crest on his helmet and cold eyes that swept over Cale with recognition and contempt. Well, the dead man walks. The Centurion's smile was cruel. Hello, Cale. It's been 5 years. You're looking rough. Titus. Cale's voice was flat, emotionless. I thought I made it clear I wanted to be left alone. You did. Unfortunately, your past has caught up with you. Titus gestured to his men, who spread out in a loose semicircle. Tribune Marcellus filed a complaint with the emperor. Seems his temple bride ran away during a storm and hasn't been seen since. Witnesses reported seeing a scarred girl wandering toward the desert. The tribune is convinced she was abducted. Lysandra's heart sank. Tribune Marcellus, the man who'd rejected her so publicly, was now claiming she'd been taken. The audacity of it was breathtaking. There's no one here but me, Cale said. Really? Because I'm fairly certain I saw movement deeper in that cave. Titus took a step forward. Hand over the girl, Cale. The tribune wants her returned. Something about preserving his reputation. Can't have people thinking his rejected bride was driven to suicide or kidnapping. She wasn't kidnapped. She chose to leave. That's not how the tribune tells it. And his word carries significantly more weight than that of a dead traitor. Titus's hand moved to his sword hilt. I'm authorized to retrieve the girl by any means necessary. You can hand her over peacefully, or we can take her by force. Your choice. Cale's grip tightened on his gladius. She stays here. Tell Marcellus the girl is dead, lost to the desert. Tell him whatever you want. But you're not taking her. I was hoping you'd say that. Titus drew his sword with a metallic whisper. Boys, it seems our deceased friend here is resisting imperial authority. You know what to do. The 5 soldiers behind Titus drew their own weapons and advanced. Lysandra watched in horror as they surrounded Cale, who stood alone in the cave entrance, outnumbered and facing trained soldiers. But Cale didn't seem concerned. If anything, he seemed to be fighting something internal, his breathing heavy, his free hand clenched into a fist. You don't want to do this, Titus, Cale said, his voice strange, deeper than normal, with an edge that made the hair on Lysandra's neck stand up. Not tonight. Not when it's this close. Close to what? Your bedtime? Titus laughed. I don't know what hole you've been hiding in, but you're still just one man against 6 trained. He never finished the sentence. Kyle's head snapped back, his mouth opening in a roar that didn't sound human. His body convulsed, muscles bulging beneath his tunic, bones cracking as they shifted. The brand on his shoulder blazed with dark light, visible even through fabric. Oh gods, one of the soldiers breathed. He's one of them. He's Beast Legion. The transformation was horrifying and mesmerizing. Cale's form expanded, growing taller and broader, his features elongating into something between man and wolf. His hands became claws, his teeth sharpened into fangs, and his eyes burned with savage golden light that held no trace of human consciousness. The beast that had been Cale let out another roar and launched itself at the nearest soldier. What followed was carnage. The creature moved with speed impossible for something so large, tearing through the soldiers like they were children playing at war. Swords bounced off hide too thick to penetrate. Armor crumpled under claws that could rend steel. The desert sand turned red with blood. Titus, to his credit, tried to mount a defense. He rallied his remaining men, attempting to use their numbers and training to bring down the beast, but military tactics meant nothing against a creature of pure rage and instinct. Within minutes, 4 soldiers lay dead or dying. The remaining 2, including Titus, had remounted their horses and were fleeing across the desert at full gallop. The beast pursued. Lysandra watched from the cave entrance as the creature that had been Kyle ran down the fleeing soldiers with terrifying efficiency. It moved on all 4s like a wolf but could rear up like a man, combining the worst aspects of both forms. Its roar echoed across the empty landscape, a sound of triumph and hunger that seemed to shake the very air. When it was over, when the last soldier had fallen, the beast stood alone in the desert, silhouetted against the setting sun. Blood stained its muzzle and claws. Its chest heaved with exertion and barely contained violence. Then it turned and looked directly at the cave, at Lysandra. She should have run, should have fled while the beast was distracted, but she stood frozen, watching as it padded slowly back toward the cave, golden eyes fixed on her with predatory focus. It stopped just outside the entrance, close enough that she could smell copper and musk, could see the intelligence lurking behind those inhuman eyes. This was Cale, somewhere inside, but it was also something else, something ancient and powerful and utterly dangerous. "Cale," she whispered, "I know you're in there. Fight it. Come back." The beast tilted its head, regarding her the way a wolf might regard an interesting piece of prey. Then it did something unexpected. It sat, like a dog obeying a command it barely understood. The beast lowered itself to its haunches and simply watched her. Its breathing slowed. The golden glow in its eyes dimmed slightly. Lysandra took a careful step forward. "That's right. You know me. I'm not a threat. I'm your friend." The words seemed to resonate. The beast's ears, more wolf than human, twitched. It made a sound low in its throat. Not quite a growl, but not friendly either. A sound of confusion, perhaps, of recognition fighting against instinct. "The chains," Lysandra said softly, remembering Cale's preparations. "You need the chains, don't you? Before you lose control completely." As if understanding, the beast rose and padded into the cave. It moved to the corner where the iron rings were anchored and stood waiting, almost docile. Lysandra's hands shook as she approached with the chains. This close, the beast was even more terrifying. Easily 7 feet tall when standing upright, with muscles that rippled beneath dark fur, claws that could disembowel her with a casual swipe. But there was something in its eyes, in the way it held itself. That was still Kale. She began securing the chains, moving slowly and deliberately. The beast allowed it, though she could feel the tension in its body, the constant war between Kale's will and the creature's instincts. When she locked the final cuff around its wrist, the beast tested the restraints once, then seemed to relax. "Thank you," Lysandra whispered, though she didn't know if Kale could still understand words. "For letting me help. For not—" She didn't finish. The beast's eyes were already beginning to glaze over, the last fragments of humanity fading as the full moon rose outside. By the time Lysandra stepped back, she was looking at pure animal, beautiful and terrible, and completely beyond reason. The beast threw its head back and howled, a sound of fury and anguish that echoed across the desert. And Lysandra understood with absolute certainty that the soldiers' attack had been only the beginning. Tribune Marcellus would hear about what happened here, would hear that his rejected temple bride was alive and protected by a beast legion soldier, would hear that 6 of his men had been slaughtered by a monster in the desert, and he would come with more soldiers, more weapons, more determination to either retrieve her or ensure she never spoke of her rejection again. The hunt was far from over. As the beast struggled against its chains, Lysandra made a decision. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't abandon Kale to face the consequences of protecting her. She would stay, and together they would face whatever came next, even if it meant standing against an empire. Even if it meant dying in the desert sand. Some things were worth fighting for, and the man who'd saved her life, who saw past her scars, who carried a curse with dignity, he was worth everything. Outside, the full moon climbed higher, bathing the desert in silver light. Inside the cave, a beast howled its rage at chains and circumstance, and between them stood a girl who'd been rejected by the world, now choosing to stand her ground against it. The real battle was about to begin. 3 nights the beast raged against its chains. 3 nights Lysandra kept watch, maintaining the fire, checking the restraints, listening to howls that seemed to shake the desert itself. She slept in brief intervals, always with one eye on the creature that had been Kale, always ready to run if the chains failed. But they held. On the morning of the 4th day, as the last traces of the full moon faded, the transformation reversed. Lysandra woke to the sound of bones cracking and reforming, of agonized breathing that was distinctly human. She rushed to the corner where the chains were anchored. Kyle hung limply in the restraints, naked and covered in blood, his own from straining against the iron. His body bore fresh wounds where the cuffs had cut into flesh, but he was human again, his eyes closed, chest rising and falling with exhausted breaths. "Kyle," Lysandra said softly, moving to unlock the restraints. "It's over." "You're back?" His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening. "Lysandra, you're still here. Where else would I be? Dead. Run away. Anything but still here." He tried to stand as she removed the last chain, but his legs wouldn't support him. She caught him as he fell, helping him to the cot. "The soldiers," Kale said, memory returning. "Titus and his men. The beast killed them." "You killed them. To protect me." Lysandra brought water and clean bandages. "How many?" 4, maybe 5. 2 escaped on horseback. Kale's expression darkened. "Then they'll report back. Tribune Marcellus will know where you are. He'll know about me, about what I am. He'll come with an entire cohort. Let him come. We'll be ready." "No." Kyle grabbed her hand with surprising strength. "An entire cohort is 80 men, trained soldiers. We can't fight that. And you'll be captured or killed. Then we run. There is nowhere else. The desert stretches for weeks. We'd die of thirst before finding shelter. The Empire doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive." A sound outside made them both freeze. Not horses this time, but many feet marching in unison. The disciplined tread of soldiers moving in formation. Kyle struggled to stand, reaching for his gladius. "They're already here." Lysandra moved to the entrance and looked out. Her heart sank. At least 100 soldiers surrounded the cave, positioned in ranks that stretched across the desert sand. They carried shields and spears, swords and bows. At their center stood a figure in ornate armor. Tribune Marcellus himself, mounted on a black horse, flanked by priests in ceremonial robes. "Kyle of the Beast Legion," Marcellus's voice carried easily across the distance. "Surrender yourself and the girl, and your death will be swift. Resist, and I will ensure it takes days." "He brought priests," Kale muttered, pulling on a tunic despite his wounds. "Why priests?" One of the robed figures stepped forward, raising his hands. "Kale, bearer of the curse, I am High Priest Octavian. You have slain soldiers of the Empire and harbored a consecrated temple bride. For these crimes, the gods demand judgment." "The gods can go to hell," Cale shouted back. "Lysandra was rejected by your precious tribune. She owes him nothing." "Then you leave us no choice." The high priest began chanting in an ancient language, words that made the air vibrate. The other priests joined in, their voices blending into a harmony that resonated with power. Cale's hand went to the brand on his shoulder. "No, they're trying to activate the curse. They're trying to force the transformation outside the full moon. Can they do that? I don't know, but it's working. I can feel the beast responding." His breathing became labored, his eyes beginning to glow faintly. Lysandra watched in horror as Cale began to change. His body convulsed, muscles bulging, bones shifting. But this transformation was different, slower, more painful, as if the beast was being dragged out against its will. "Stop!" Lysandra ran from the cave, standing between the soldiers and Cale's transforming form. "Stop this!" "He murdered Imperial soldiers," Marcellus interrupted coldly, "and he defiled a temple bride. The punishment is death, and the method is the god's judgment." "I wasn't defiled. I chose to stay. He saved my life after you rejected me." Lysandra's voice broke with fury. "You humiliated me in front of the entire city, called me damaged goods. When I ran, when I chose exile over shame, this man showed me more kindness than you ever did." "Silence her," Marcellus commanded. Two soldiers moved forward, but Lysandra didn't retreat. Behind her, she heard the transformation complete, heard the beast's first roar. "If you want him," she said, her voice clear despite her fear, "you'll have to go through me first." The high priest's chanting faltered. "Girl, move aside. This is divine judgment." "Divine judgment?" Lysandra laughed, edged with hysteria. "The gods marked my face from birth. They chose me as a temple bride, then let me be rejected. Now you claim they demand judgment on someone who showed me compassion?" She spread her arms wide. "If the gods want judgment, let them judge me too. If Cale is cursed, then so am I, for I cannot live without him." The words hung in the desert air, bold and impossible and completely sincere. Behind her, the beast went silent. The high priest stared at her as if she'd sprouted wings. "You would bind yourself to a cursed being? Accept the same judgment as one marked by ancient magic?" "I would. I do." Lysandra turned to look at the beast, at the golden eyes that watched her with understanding. "I choose him, curse and all, man and beast. Whatever the gods decide, we face it together." Thunder rolled across the cloudless sky. The high priest stumbled backward. "Impossible! The ritual requires—" His words were cut off by lightning that struck the ground between the soldiers and the cave. Not killing lightning, but a message, clear and unmistakable. The storm that followed was unlike anything the desert had ever seen. Wind howled, tearing at the soldiers' formations. Sand rose in clouds that obscured vision. Lightning struck again and again, not at random but with purpose, forcing the troops to scatter, driving them back. Tribune Marcellus fought to control his terrified horse. "What sorcery is this?" "Not sorcery," the high priest said, his voice filled with awe and terror. "The gods themselves. They're responding to her claim. She's invoked the ancient rite of soul binding." "Then stop her." "I can't." The choice was hers to make. The priest looked at Lysandra with something like pity. "Girl, do you understand? Soul binding means your fate is tied to his for eternity. If he dies, you die. If he transforms, you feel his pain. You've made yourself part of his curse." "Good," Lysandra said simply. Another crack of lightning, this one striking the brand on the beast's shoulder. The creature roared, not in pain, but in shock. Dark light blazed from the mark, spreading across its body like water, changing it. The transformation reversed, but not back to Cale's original form. Instead, something between man and beast emerged. Cale's face, but with golden eyes. His form, but more powerful. Clawed hands, but capable of fine control. A hybrid that combined both natures. "The curse is broken," the high priest whispered. "But the soul is bound. They are one now, man, beast, and the girl who chose them both." Kyle, the new version of him, looked at his transformed hands, then at Lysandra. When he spoke, his voice was his own, fully conscious. "You fool, you beautiful, impossible fool. Do you know what you've done? Saved you, saved us." Lysandra moved to his side. "We're bound now, together." The storm began to fade. Tribune Marcellus and his soldiers were already retreating, their horses panicking, their formations broken. Even the tribune seemed to understand that this was beyond military force. This was divine intervention. As the last soldiers disappeared into the desert, Cale and Lysandra stood alone outside the cave. "What now?" she asked. "Now?" Cale looked at his transformed reflection in a pool of water. "Now we figure out what we are, what we've become. Together." He took her hand, and she felt the warmth of it, human warmth, despite the claws. "I chose this," she said. "I'll never regret it. Ask me in 100 years if you still feel that way." "I will," Lysandra promised. "Because we have 100 years now, maybe more." "That's what soul binding means, right?" Cale smiled, a strange expression on his hybrid features, but genuine. "That's exactly what it means." Together, they turned back toward the cave, toward whatever life awaited two beings who'd been rejected by the world and chosen each other instead. The gods had judged them, and the judgment was love. Chapter 6. The Beast's Redemption. 10 years passed like wind across the desert. The city of Aurelion still stood, its marble columns gleaming in the sun, its temples still burning with offering fires. But the city had changed in subtle ways that only those who remembered would notice. The temple bride ceremony had been abolished 5 years ago, after 3 consecutive years of maidens fleeing, rather than accepting their selections. Tribune Marcellus had died under mysterious circumstances. Some said poison, others claimed divine retribution. The high priests spoke less frequently about the gods' judgment, perhaps remembering what happened when they invoked it against the wrong people. And in the desert beyond the eastern gates, travelers began to report strange sightings. "A guardian," they said, "a creature that was neither fully man nor fully beast, with golden eyes that could see through lies and claws that could tear through steel." He protected those who wandered lost in the desert, guided caravans away from bandit ambushes, and left offerings of water at the sites where travelers had died. Some called him a monster, others swore he was a god, but those who met him face to face, those who were fortunate enough to be saved by him, all told the same story. He was not alone. A woman walked beside him, a woman with 3 scars on her cheek and a laugh that sounded like morning bells. She spoke to the lost with kindness, tended the injured with skilled hands, and looked at her companion with such love that it made even the most cynical travelers believe in miracles. On this particular morning, Lysandra stood at the entrance of what had once been Cale's simple cave, and was now something closer to a home. They'd expanded the dwelling over the years, carving new chambers from the stone, adding a garden that defied the desert's hostility through careful irrigation. Herbs grew in neat rows, their green leaves a rebellion against the sand. A small fountain, fed by an underground spring Cale had discovered, provided the sound of running water, a luxury in this harsh land. She was grinding herbs for medicine when she heard the familiar sound of Cale's approach. He moved differently now than he had as a fully human Centurion, more fluid, more graceful, with the predatory ease of something that was comfortable in its own skin, regardless of what that skin looked like. He appeared around the rock formation that sheltered their home, carrying a young goat that had wandered away from a nearby nomad camp. The animal was calm in his arms, not frightened despite being held by something that looked like it should be tearing it apart. "Another lost one?" Lysandra asked, smiling. They never learned to watch their herds properly. Kyle set the goat down gently, and it immediately trotted to the garden to nibble at the herbs. "I'll return it after sunset. The nomads will be camped at the western oasis by then." He moved to the fountain, washing dust from his hands and face. In the sunlight, his transformation was clearly visible, skin that held a faint pattern like fur beneath the surface, eyes that gleamed gold even in daylight, hands that ended in claws he'd learned to control with perfect precision. He was beautiful and terrible, human and beast, a living contradiction that somehow made perfect sense. "You're restless today," Lysandra observed, setting aside her grinding stone. "What's troubling you?" Cale was silent for a moment, staring out at the desert that had become their kingdom. "A merchant caravan is arriving from the east. They're carrying news from the capital. The emperor is dying." "The emperor?" Lysandra moved to stand beside him. "But he's only, 50? 53. Old enough to die of natural causes, young enough that it's suspicious." Cale's expression was unreadable. "They're saying his son will take the throne. Prince Marcus. Do you remember him?" "I never met any royalty. I was just a potter's daughter. Prince Marcus was part of the northern campaigns. He was there when my cohort discovered the temple." Kale's jaw tightened. He was the one who ordered the prisoners executed. He was the one who told my commander to brand me and leave me to die. Understanding dawned cold in Lysandra's chest. He knows what you are, what you survived. More than that, he knows the curse can be transferred, knows there are others like me scattered across the empire, soldiers who refused immoral orders and were punished with transformation. If he becomes emperor, Kale trailed off, but the implication was clear. He'll hunt you, hunt all of you. He'll try to eliminate every reminder of what he did in the north, every witness to his crimes. Kale turned to face her fully. Lysandra, I need to tell you something. Over the past few years, I've been making contact with others like me, other Beast Legion soldiers who survived their curses. There are 12 of us now, scattered from Britannia to Egypt. We've been preparing. Preparing for what? For the moment when we'd need to stand together, to protect ourselves and anyone else the new emperor decides is inconvenient. He took her hands in his, careful with his claws. It means leaving here, gathering the others, possibly fighting. Lysandra should have been afraid, should have argued for safety, for staying hidden in their desert sanctuary. But she'd spent 10 years watching Kale struggle with the aftermath of his curse, watching him turn something terrible into something meaningful. She'd seen him save dozens of travelers, guide lost children back to their families, protect the weak from bandits who thought the desert was lawless. She'd also felt the soul binding between them grow stronger with each passing year. She knew his thoughts before he spoke them, felt his pain as if it were her own, shared his strength in moments when her human body would have failed. Then we go, she said simply. We gather the others, and we make sure the new emperor understands that some people can't be eliminated quietly. Kyle's expression softened with relief and love. You realize this means leaving our home, possibly forever. Means entering the world that rejected both of us, that called us monsters and damaged goods. The world rejected who we were. It hasn't met who we've become. Lysandra smiled, touching his face, the face that was both human and beast, both curse and gift. Besides, we were never meant to hide forever. The gods didn't bind our souls so we could spend eternity in a cave. They bound us so we could do something that required both of us. And what's that? Change things. Protect others like us. Show the empire that curses can be blessings, that the marked and the rejected have value, that power comes in forms the temples never consecrated. She leaned her head against his chest, hearing the dual rhythm of his heart. One beat human, one beat beast, perfectly synchronized. We're proof that love is stronger than any curse. Let's make sure everyone knows it. That evening, as the sun set over the desert painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Kyle and Lysandra began their preparations. They would leave their sanctuary, gather the scattered Beast Legion, and face whatever the new emperor threw at them. They would not hide. They would not run. They would stand together, 12 cursed soldiers, and the people who loved them anyway. Proof that the gods' judgment was more complex than any priest understood. Word spread quickly through the empire's shadows. Travelers carried stories of the Beast Guardian and his scarred companion, of others like him emerging from hiding, of a rebellion that wasn't about conquest or revenge but simply about the right to exist. Some called them abominations, others called them legends. But everyone agreed on one thing. They were coming, and when they arrived, the Empire would have to decide. Could monsters be heroes? Could the cursed be redeemed? Could love really tame what divinity could not? Lysandra knew the answer. She'd known it since the moment she chose to stand before the gods and claim a cursed soldier as her own. She'd known it through 10 years of building a life in the desert, of watching Kale wrestle with his dual nature, of feeling the soul binding grow stronger with each shared sunrise. Love didn't tame the beast. It didn't need to. Love accepted the beast, the man, and everything between. Love saw the whole person, curse and blessing, strength and weakness, human and monster, and chose them anyway. That was the real redemption, not changing what you were, but finding someone who loved you for exactly that. As they walked away from their desert home toward whatever battles awaited, Kale and Lysandra moved as one, two souls bound together, two outcasts who'd found belonging in each other, two legends just beginning to be written. Behind them, the cave stood empty, but not abandoned. They would return someday when the fighting was over, when the new emperor learned his lesson, when the empire finally understood that some marks were meant to be worn with pride. Until then, they had work to do, curses to redeem, people to protect, a world to show that rejection was just the beginning of the story, not the end. And as the stars emerged above the desert, lighting their path forward, both Cale and Lysandra smiled. They'd been rejected by the world. Now they were going to save it anyway, because that's what heroes did, even heroes who looked like monsters, especially heroes who'd learned that love was the greatest magic of all, stronger than curses, deeper than judgment, more enduring than any empire. The rejected temple bride and the fallen Centurion, the woman with scars and the man with claws. Together they walked into legend, and the legend whispered through eternity, love had tamed what divinity could not through force or binding or control, but through choice, through acceptance, through the simple, impossible courage of seeing someone completely, beast and all, and saying, I choose you forever, the end.